Thank you, everyone, for joining us today from various parts of the world. We are grateful for your time to be part of this important discussion. My name is Janine Rishmawi, and I am the Advocacy Director for the IMEU Policy Project. The IMEU Policy Project is a 501c4 organization affiliated with the Institute for Middle East Understanding, IMEU. We educate voters and policymakers and advocates in Congress and the executive branch for U.S. policies that uphold Palestinian rights and freedom. A huge thank you to our acclaimed panelists who are speaking with us today. We are joined by Palestinian attorney and analyst Diana Buttu, Orly Noy, who is an editor at Local Call and chair of the human rights organization Beit Salem. We're also joined by Muna Haddad, who is an attorney with Adalah's Legal Center for Arab Minority Rights in Israel. This is an urgent briefing to discuss Israel's passing of the racist death penalty law on March 30th, which was also Palestinian Land Day. Following its passage, international human rights organizations condemned the law, including the UN High Commissioner, calling for the law to be repealed, emphasizing the discriminatory nature of only applying to Palestinians, calling it a violation of international law. We will hear from our panel of experts on the various ways this horrifying development is an additional way Israel is entrenching its oppression of the Palestinian people, institutionalizing apartheid, and targeting imprisoned Palestinians. Before this law was passed, at least 98 Palestinians have died in Israeli prisons in just the past 2.5 years, including Palestinian doctors from Gaza who were tortured to death and Palestinians as young as 17. Speakers will discuss what this law is, the impact on Palestinians, and how legal experts are contesting the racist law, and how it emboldens impunity for Israel's crimes against the Palestinian people, particularly as we're witnessing Israel bomb Iran, Lebanon, and continue its genocide against Palestinians. We also want to take a moment to recognize that today Palestinians are commemorating the Deir Yassin massacre, a massacre that occurred on April 9th, 1948, during which armed Zionist gangs, which are now, have turned into the Israeli military occupation, murdered over 100 Palestinians. And here we are nearly 80 years later, still demanding an end to Israel's crimes against the Palestinian people. Each speaker will start with a short introductory statement, and I'll move on to 2 rounds of moderated questions. After that time, we'll answer questions from the audience. I would like to introduce our speakers. Today, we are joined by Diana Buttu. Diana is a Palestinian rights lawyer and analyst specializing in international law. She's a frequent commentator and writer on Palestinian human rights and political developments in the region. Diana is the author of Zateo's Diary from a Palestinian in Israel and was a legal advisor to the Palestinian negotiating team in the early 2000s. Orly Noy is an Iranian-Israeli activist, editor at Local Call, and has been a member of the writing team since the site's inception. And she is also chair of the human rights organization Beit Salem. Orly is a political activist known for conducting exclusive interviews and writing human interest stories on marginalized Palestinians in Israeli communities. Muna Haddad is a Palestinian human rights lawyer with Adalah's Legal Center for Arab Minority Rights in Israel and a PhD candidate in the School of Law at Queen's Mary University of London. She co-authored Adalah's petition to the Supreme Court against the death penalty law on behalf of a coalition of rights organizations and several Palestinian members of the Israeli parliament. Mona, can you please first describe to us in general what this death penalty law is and what groups like Adalah are doing to contest the decision and what we can expect and how soon this could go into official practice and what are the immediate implications for Palestinians?
Thank you. The death penalty law, it's basically just to say that the legal and advocacy efforts didn't start with the passage of the law last week. It's throughout the legislative process, many organizations, including Adalah, have engaged extensively with international bodies, with UN mechanisms, and with states, and submitted detailed legal position opposing this legislation. And despite significant international pressure, Israeli lawmakers proceeded to pass this law and even celebrated it. So in terms of legal challenges, and I will explain throughout what this law actually says. So, Adalah, together with four other human rights organizations and Knesset members, submitted a petition, I think, an hour after the law was passed. And other petitions have been also submitted by other groups against this legislation, and it demands both the cancellation, just to pronounce that the law is void and null for being unconstitutional, and we also asked for immediate interim injunction to hold the law's implementation. So the law basically operates in two different tracks. We know that it imposes death penalty almost exclusively against Palestinians from their different geographies. So in the first track, it's directed against Palestinians from the West Bank that we know that are under occupation and military rule. And the other track is for Palestinians who are citizens of Israel and also residents of the illegally occupied East Jerusalem, and also residents from Gaza for acts that are committed in Israeli territory. So in relation to the West Bank, so even before getting into the substance of this law, we know that we now have a piece of legal and Israeli law, this legislation, that is unlawfully being extended to an occupied territory. So this is in itself a violation of international law and an illegal act. And then when you go to the substance, it just makes this illegality scream out even more. So what the law requires for the Israeli Minister of Defense within 30 days of the passage of the law, so the countdown has already started, to instruct the military commander to amend the security provisions order, which is the main legal framework governing Palestinians in the West Bank, so in order to incorporate a near mandatory death penalty, which is very exceptional in itself, even within countries that have the death penalty still intact. So, like having a mandatory sentence where the court can only deviate to life imprisonment only in extreme and exceptional cases. And this is absolutely prohibited under international law. So it applies to Palestinians from the West Bank who are convicted of what the law defines as intentional causing of death in the context of a terror offense, which is also defined in Israeli law, in Israel's counterterrorism law. And it's a very broad definition, and it includes acts that are carried out with a political, national, or ideological motive. So whatever they decide that is, and with the aim of creating fear or influencing a government. So this is what a terror offense is defined under Israeli law. And in practice, this very wide definition is only applied, of course, to Palestinians, and the law itself excludes even Israeli settlers who are illegally present in the West Bank. What the law also does, what the military orders are supposed to include, is also what it does. It cancels existing procedural safeguards. So we have the military court system in the West Bank, which is already flawed. And what it does is that any chance of a fair trial or any guarantee of a due process, it actually targets it. I can go more into details of that later. And for now, like I checked, and the military order hasn't been amended yet. So we know that the 30 days haven't passed. But if the court doesn't act, then the Minister of Defense will go on to give that order to amend to amend the military order, and it can be applied. And what is important for me to note now is that it's going to apply for future offenses, and it doesn't apply to current prisoners or people that have already been accused or are being held for committing allegedly like an act, any act or other. So in relation to Palestinian citizens of Israel, the East Jerusalem or from Gaza, so the law says that the Israeli penal law should be amended, and I've seen, and it's already been amended and introduced the death penalty there. And so the offense that has been added, which is anyone who commits an intentional act of killing, undermining the existence of the state of Israel, which it doesn't like this kind of definition. You can't find it anywhere. It's very vague. We can't really understand what it is, but you know that it's directed against Palestinians. So, and it's under what the law defines as terror circumstances, which of course applies to Palestinians. And in this case, unlike what happens in the West Bank, the court can choose between a life sentence or a death penalty. But also, like within the whole death penalty law, the same kind of procedural defenses, they're also undermined within the law. And so what we can expect now depends largely on how the law and how the court responds. So now it gave the state until the 24th of May to respond both to the interim injunction and both to the petition itself. And we're going to have to wait and see if it temporarily holds the implementation of the law until the proceeding ends.
Thank you, Muna. And building off of what you mentioned about it exclusively targeting Palestinians, Diana, can you speak a bit more? When this was passed, as we mentioned, the UN Commissioner called to repeal this law because of the application only applying to Palestinians. Can you talk about the death penalty legislation and how Israel using it as another way to kill Palestinians with impunity, and how it is a product of racism towards Palestinians exhibited by Israel?
Thank you, Janine, and thank you to the IMEU Policy Project. And I especially want to thank Orly and Muna for being alongside with me on this panel. It's really nice to see you both. In terms of the law and the racist parts of it, I think Muna went over it very nicely. And there's a couple of things that I think are important to add. The first is that Israel, in fact, did have the death penalty on the books for its civilian system, meaning the system that Mona had talked about that is applicable to people who hold Israeli citizenship. But that was repealed in 1954. And it has always had the death penalty on the books when it comes to Palestinians who are being tried under this military system. Since 1967, it's had it. And that law dates back to the times of the British. This isn't new. The difference is that unlike what the Israelis did in 1954 when they repealed the death penalty, since 1967, all they've done is refrain from applying the death penalty when it comes to Palestinians. That's it. They've never, ever repealed it. And so what's the difference? It's because they've always had in the back of their mind, the Israeli military government has always had in the back of their mind this ability to be able to use the death penalty. And we've seen many times where we've seen people be sentenced, and in the sentencing, judges will come forward and say, if it were up to me, I would be imposing the death penalty. And so it's something that's always been there. Another thing that's important to keep in mind is that there have been, the last time I counted, something like 22 attempts to try to legislate the death penalty since the year 2004. This isn't the first time at all. And this is not the product of October 2003. It became well before that. So much so that the last iteration, or one of the earlier iterations of it, excuse me, not the last one of the earlier iterations of it in 2016 almost exactly mirrored what we're now seeing. And the support for it amongst the Israeli public was high then, back in 2016, and remains high today. So back in 2016 was something like 71%, and is equally high today. And so it begs the question, well, why haven't they been pushing it? And the reason largely relies on the fact that Israel likes to maintain this image of being a so-called democracy, that it's a state that doesn't carry out the death penalty, that's a Western democratic state. But at the same time, as I mentioned, it's not that they repealed the death penalty, it's that they simply refrained from using it. Now the mask is off, and it's been off for quite some time, but now it's as though, the government really doesn't care any longer what that image is. And because they don't care, that's why we're seeing that they're pushing through not just this law, but so many other laws. One of the problems, Janine, is not just the way that Muna laid it out, which is very racist, and you can hear from what she said just how racist it is. It's that it's also flattening and taking away this issue of the right to resist. So it's somehow refusing to recognize that Israel is an occupier, and that under the laws of occupation, and under international law, resistance, there is a right to resist, and instead is transforming resistance into a criminal act where all of this becomes flattened. So it's no longer a question of people resisting, but that this is all becoming criminalized. And again, this is one of the problems with it, is because it's not just in terms of its application, who it's being applied to, but why it's being applied. And the whole essence of it is that they want to somehow criminalize this idea, that criminalize any resistance to Israel's military rule. And so its timing is not at all coincidental. And so I'm going to leave it to Orly, who I know wants to speak about that point, to pick up there.
Thank you so much, Diana. And I'll pass it to Orly to speak more about this context. And as also, you can just speak more to Diana's point, how this is being used to further entrench Israel's system of apartheid, ethnic cleansing, how that's extended now to other parts of the world, and exemplifies Israel's two-tiered legal system.
Thank you so much, Janine, and thank you for having me. It really is a privilege to be speaking alongside Diana and Muna. So I think the question of your question is a really important one. How this new law plays into entrenching further the apartheid, the Israeli apartheid regime between the river and the sea, because this is exactly the context in which this law must be understood, not as an inner, Israeli judicial or legislative matter, but actually as part of the Israeli apartheid regime. I will maybe later on speak a bit about the timing of the passing of this law that Diana mentioned. But for now, I will just say, you mentioned, Janine, that I'm an Iranian Israeli. I was born in Iran. I grew up in Iran. And as much as I am horrified by the cruelty of the current Iranian regime, I must say that this new Israeli law is even more extreme than the Iranian execution law, because the Iranian law doesn't differentiate. It does not differentiate between people who are subjected to the law on the basis of their ethnicity or national identity, which the Israeli law does, as Muna explained. There is so much that has already been said and written, including the B'Tselem report about the way that this regime of apartheid operates by dividing and governing all Palestinians living under the Israeli control into different categories, in each of which the status of Jews is superior to the status of the Palestinians, and in each of which Israel uses a special set of tools for oppression and discrimination against the Palestinians. So this is, I think, the context that this new law should be looked at. Now, I think that as the Israeli fascism deepens and Israel digs deeper into, Diana called it taking the masks off. I call it the cannibalistic phase of the Israeli existence. The tool it uses against the Palestinians are becoming more and more extreme. In other words, it is no longer about the discrimination against the rights of the Palestinians that is at stake, but it is their very lives. And in each and every one of the categories that Israel sort of divided the Palestinians into. And I can mention a few. I mean, of course, speaking of Gaza, there is in Gaza, Palestinian lives are being taken in a full ongoing genocide. In the West Bank, alongside the ongoing ethnic cleansing, there are already pure executions, and there is no other way to call that other than executions in broad daylight of Palestinians by soldiers and by settlers with full impunity. And I can mention the case of Odeh Hadelin because, he was a dear friend to many of us. And many of us knew him personally. Odeh was shot in front of at least 20 cameras that were filming his execution. And of course, the executor was free to go very shortly after. And now, under the new law, the executions are being institutionalized by the state. And within the 48 borders, within the borders of Israel, we must mention, I think, in this context, the phenomenon of organized crime that has been crushing the lives of Palestinian citizens, with the Israeli police deliberately turning a blind eye to allow this organized crime to flourish as another tool of putting Palestinian lives in constant danger, and another tool of execution, actually, of Palestinians as part of the project of crushing the Palestinian existence, both collectively and individually. So the full context in which this law must be seen, I think, as another significant layer in the apartheid regime that ultimately seeks to really eliminate the Palestinian existence. And it is fully a full part of the mechanism of the apartheid regime.
Thank you so much, Orly. And building off of what you just mentioned in terms of this being, an escalation of what's already taking place on the ground, I would love to hear from you, Muna. Many Palestinian international human rights experts have stated that Israel already has a de facto policy of killing Palestinians, and targeting Palestinian prisoners in brutal ways. Can you expand more on why this is a very dangerous escalation?
Yeah, so Yeah, it was interesting to hear, like hearing from lawyers that represent Palestinians in Israeli prisons, that they were like, okay, what does this law give us? Like the prisoners are being killed in these detention camps. And yeah, so they weren't that, they are, of course, concerned about the law, but they weren't that outraged because we are like surrounded by these deaths. But it is dangerous. I mean, like we know, like you mentioned, over 9,500 Palestinian political prisoners are in Israeli detention camps. Their conditions have been described as hell on earth. They have been undergoing torture, inhuman, living under inhuman conditions, facing starvation, rape, and other sexual violence, and medical neglect. And we know that, like even from my research, we know that even in their death, and we know that almost 100 Palestinian political prisoners have died since October 7th, that the violence doesn't end because their bodies are being withheld. We know that at least 88 identified prisoners' bodies are still being held in Israel. So they are extending this violence not only to them, but to their families as well, who are waiting to mourn and grieve them, and taking away the dignity. So, and what is critical here, and what's important to understand, is that these practices are not an exception. And what this law tells us is that these are not exceptions, and these are part of the legal and the political Israeli system, and they are being normalized. Like death is being absolutely normalized. We see that there is absolutely no intention of holding anyone accountable, like Orly mentioned. And we know that the legal system has legalized extrajudicial executions. And now we see what the law is trying to do is just legalize this killing through the court system, through this death penalty that the courts are just they just need to approve. So the death penalty translates what's already been happening from like a practice into an explicit legal framework. And yeah, this kind of violence and this is extreme dehumanization of Palestinians is manifesting in all these like horrific ways across all of historic Palestine. So I'll stop here for now.
Thank you so much, Muna. And Diana, I'd like to turn to you now to talk a bit more about what you talked about criminalizing the, Palestinians' existence on our land. Palestinians have called for a general strike to protest this policy. Palestinian Prisoners' Day is also approaching on April 17th. Can you talk more about the plight of Palestinians who are imprisoned by Israel and discuss that significance it holds for Palestinian freedom more broadly? And I would love to expand more on what you mentioned earlier.
Sure. So I think it's important because I don't know what people know on this webinar, but I'm going to step back a little bit and talk about the system of Palestinian political prisoners. Right now, I was just looking at the numbers. The numbers are roughly 9,600 Palestinian political prisoners. Now, of that 9,600, I think it's roughly 3,500 are being held under or being in prison, not held, under a system where they haven't been charged with a single crime. And under that system, which has this very bizarre name called administrative detention, because there's nothing administrative about it. It sounds very like harmless. People can be held for 6 months at a time. And then their imprisonment can be renewed and renewed and renewed and renewed, provided that they are able to see a judge. There's another 1,000, we're not even really sure the full number, that are being held. These are people who are being imprisoned who are from Gaza, who are being imprisoned under this like made up system, this third system that the Israelis made up called unlawful combatants. And this is Hossam Abu Safi and other people that people may have heard about as well, who are being denied even less, whose rights are even further being taken away from them. And then of that number, so we have roughly a third that are being imprisoned without charges. Then there's a third that haven't been tried yet. So you've got, of this, 2/3 haven't been convicted of anything. And yet all of these prisoners, all of them, and again, it doesn't mean to say that if you've been convicted, you should be tortured, but all of them are facing everything from torture to assaults, to medical neglect, to starvation, to lack of not being able to have the proper hygiene. They've been cut off from water. They're being given a shower once a week for about a minute or two. Every single political prisoner I've interviewed, including children who have been released, have told me that they've been tortured. This is without fail. And I've interviewed many. This is without fail. Every last one of them has described in excruciating detail levels of torture that are unbelievable. And it's not as though this isn't known, because it is known. There was a case back in July of 2024 when it became clear that Israeli soldiers had actually raped a man who was from Gaza, who actually, by the way, ended up later being released without any charge. And when it was found out by an Israeli doctor, that he was being raped, the case was pushed forward to try to get some sort of prosecution. And some Israeli ministers were actually protesting. They were literally protesting for the right to be able to rape Palestinian political prisoners. These soldiers, by the way, have been released without any charge, without any trial, without anything. Right. And so all of this is to say, and it doesn't stop there. We also have the Minister of National Security himself, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the man who, one of the sponsors of this law, who was the man who you could see wearing the lapel that was in the shape of a noose, who was on social media going to the gallows. One person from his own political party dressed up as an executioner for Purim. I mean, you can see him himself going to some of these prisons and cheering on these prison guards in their torture of Palestinians. And this is airing on national television. This is not hidden behind closed doors. This is not some sort of investigative journalism that's required to uncover it, as much as I appreciate the investigative journalism. But it's not required because they're out in the open of this. So this is all to say that it's not just a question of torture being normalized, it's actually being celebrated. And when you look at what both Muna and Orly have mentioned in terms of killings, this law is simply an extension of what everything else has happened over the course of the past few decades, which is that Palestinians have been routinely killed without anybody being held to account. And so instead of them instituting laws so that the state executes them, they let the state agents execute them, meaning soldiers, settlers, and others with complete impunity. What's now happened is the codification of it, putting it into legal practice. And I really want to caution and say that we shouldn't, this is not a nothing. It's not just like, okay, this is an extension. We shouldn't be normalizing this. Just because Israel's normalized it doesn't mean that we should be normalizing it. Nobody on this panel, of course, is normalizing it. But I want people to be aware that the two go hand in hand. The fact that we've seen all of this torture taking place in prisons, and it's not just since October of 23, it predates it. The fact that we've seen all of this torture taking place in prisons, the fact that we've seen a 90+% conviction rate, where people are convicted on the basis of secret evidence and through confessions that are extracted through torture, or other people confessing through torture, like confessions against others through torture. The fact that we have seen that Palestinians are routinely being killed, and now that we see the codification of this law, they're all one and the same. These are all they're pairing one another. These aren't two separate things. It's all of these practices coming together.
Thank you, Diana. And Orly, I would like to turn to you now to hear a bit more about, building off of what Diana just said, of how human rights groups like Beit Salem document this abuse that takes place in Israeli prisons against Palestinians, which is described as a network of torture chambers. Can you discuss a bit more about that work and how this leads to further impunity for what we're seeing for Israel is doing today?
Yeah. So the issue of the rights of Palestinian prisoners is I think on the agenda of many Israeli human rights organizations. I can mention, of course, B'Tselem, Adalah, of course, the Association for Civil Rights, the Committee Against Torture, Physicians for Human Rights, etc. And I think it's not by chance, it's not a coincidence. The issue of the Palestinian prisoners has such significance and such unimaginable scope that it touches the deepest layers of the Palestinian existence under the Israeli brutality. And it also touches, I think, the fundamentals of the Palestinian struggle for justice. So it's no coincidence that so many human rights organizations are dealing with that issue. You asked about gathering the evidence. As I mentioned earlier, as the Israeli regime sinks deeper into fascism, it of course affects the ability of human rights organizations to do our work in the way that we would like to do. But within these limitations, and in the face of a very biased and hostile, also public opinion here in Israel, of course, we try to promote first and foremost information, just knowledge about the issue. Because in the Israeli discourse and Israeli politics do that very often, that they use rhetoric full of lies regarding the conditions of the Palestinian prisoners. Itamar Ben-Gvir, he really loves to do these extravagant visits to the Israeli jails and walk very smugly, among the Palestinian prisoners' cells and speak about how the vacation is over, as if the conditions of the Palestinian prisoners were ever anything resembling a paid vacation. So just to bring the information, the facts, what are the conditions of Palestinian prisoners in the Israeli jail, became very important. And this is what we did in the report we published called Welcome to Hell, which is a quote that the Palestinian prisoner mentioned. With this sentence, he was welcomed, quote unquote, to the prison. When he entered the prison, one of the security personnel there told him, "Welcome to hell." So just gathering information is the first thing, and then we try to advocate with legislators, with diplomats and public opinion leaders in the international arena, and also as much as we can, of course, inside Israel. We work with Israeli, Palestinian, international media, anything we can do basically to raise awareness and to broaden the public discourse around this subject. You asked about how we document and how we gather information. It is not easy, to put it very, very mildly, to document systematic crimes and tortures that are used against Palestinian prisoners. First, because it is not easy for people to speak about the awful, horrifying, undescribable things that they went through. Yes, it's not easy for a person to sit in front of a stranger and speak about how he was sexually very brutally abused, how he was, attacked by dogs, and all the really horrifying things that I don't want to repeat now. I will just say this. At B'Tselem, we had to send the researchers who gathered these testimonies to psychological treatment. They needed treatment just hearing those testimonies from the Palestinian prisoners. So imagine what the prisoners went through and how incredibly difficult it must be for them to speak about it. Another thing that makes it very difficult is the fact that they are threatened. They are very often, very explicitly threatened by the Israeli personnel, by the prison personnel, to not ever speak about what happened to them. Otherwise, they can be arrested again, or something can happen to their family and so on. So there is also a question of fear. They are just very, very frightened to speak about the horrible experiences they went through. And not yet, because of all that, it is of enormous importance, precisely because of the question of impunity that was mentioned before. Because Israel has always made a dual use of the legal system. On the one hand, it uses it to present itself to the world as this law-abiding democratic state with checks and balances, where there is a functioning legal system in which Palestinians are brought before a judge and they can defend themselves. Of course, they never mention the non-existing rate of acquittals in military courts when it comes to Palestinians. But Israel uses the legal system to, to pretend that it is a democratic law-abiding state. And on the other hand, the legal system is at the same time is one of the most brutal tools of oppression against the Palestinians. I must tell you, sometimes it is amazing. You can see so many generations of Palestinians. I personally have more than 3 friends that they have 3 generations of prisoners in their families, like the grandfather, the father, and now the son. So Israel turned at the same time the imprisonment of Palestinians almost into a hereditary disease that passes on from father to son. So it is really important to expose this double deception, so as not to allow Israel to continue hiding behind this image of a state of law while receiving complete impunity for all the crimes that it is committing.
Thank you, Orly. We're going to go through one more round of questions, and I see many, many questions in the chat, but we will definitely have time to get to those. I do just want to go and have each of the panelists. Muna, I want to start with you, bringing back to what Diana mentioned about the timing of this. And Mona, I would love to hear from you. As we mentioned at the top, Israel has been committing a genocide, is now bombing Lebanon, Iran. Um, Adalah has presented this legal petition to contest the law. Can you speak a bit more about, other legal measures Adalah has taken, particularly in this moment, to push to hold Israel accountable for their violations against Palestinians or Palestinian prisoners? And, if there's other ways folks can also support that work, but would love to hear more from you about that work by Adalah.
So yes, of course. So yeah, like I mentioned, like even before this legislation passed, and I think that since the inception of Israel, but mainly since the October 7th, we've seen like a high rise in discriminatory laws and absurd laws, maybe in some measures. And so our main avenue of work is trying to challenge this vis-a-vis the Israeli legal system, Israeli authorities, addressing them. This is a big part of what we do, but we also know that pressure needs to also come from the outside, from states, from organizations, and from activists. So, like pressure needs to come through them as well. So advocacy is also important, and yeah, I think that like even with this law, we've seen states a day before it passed, like the France or the British government trying to pressure Israel in order not to pass this law because it doesn't suit a democracy. Like Orly mentioned, it's like it has an image to preserve, and even these efforts didn't help so far. So I think that it's important to keep on escalating as well.
Thank you so much, Mona. And I will pass it to Deanna now. I would love to hear a bit from you in terms of, again, your perspective in terms of the timing of this taking place. You mentioned Ben-Gvir was, celebrating with champagne and, with a loose on his lapel. What kind of level of impunity has Israel, do you think, is receiving at this point, given what we're seeing they're doing in the world and the timing of this taking place?
I think it would be a big mistake to just focus on this law as being a reaction to October of 2023. And I say this because, as I mentioned earlier, there have been dozens of attempts to try to pass this type of legislation since 2004. Dozens of attempts, and so to just somehow tie it to this one period is, I think, incorrect. And the reason I think that it's incorrect is that this push to have the death penalty has been around since the inception, like since the Nakba, since the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. And the reason that it has been around is because, again, the whole point is to try to get rid of Palestinians. The fervor of it increased in 1967 after Israel occupied the West Bank, Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. And it hasn't stopped since. That we haven't seen that there's been a decline in this. There's been people who've eased up in terms of pushing it forward as legislation, but it's always been a subtext there. It's always, always, always been there. And again, I think it would be a mistake to somehow tie it to this period. This was the first push for this in the most recent period was in November of 2025. And that's when we also began to see that prosecutors were starting to push for and ask and request the death penalty by some people who are facing these trials in military courts. Again, this is a kangaroo court. Why now? Effectively, because it can. We've seen that Israel's managed to carry out genocide for 2.5 years and get away with it. And what so many people, particularly on this panel and others, were warning was that if you don't stop Israel now, believe me, it's going to continue. And it has. What Israel did and continues to do in Gaza is now spread to Lebanon. You'll once recall that they used to call it the Dahya doctrine, meaning that they were going to flatten parts. They would refer to what they did in Lebanon and say, we're going to, carry out a Dahya doctrine in Gaza. Now it's the other way around. Now they're saying to Lebanon, we're going to do the Rafah doctrine or the Khan Yunis doctrine, meaning they're going to totally wipe out places. We know what they did in Khan Yunis and in Rafah. And so it's because they can, because nobody has stopped Israel during this period of neither Gaza, nor what it's doing in Lebanon, nor what the bombing, massive bombing in Iran, as well as in Syria. And so all to say, because Israel hasn't faced a green light, it keeps going ahead with whatever green light it can.
Thank you, Diana. And Orly, I'd also love to hear from you, especially as your perspective as an Iranian and living in Israel. Can you speak more about what we're witnessing, what Israel is doing around the world, and as we mentioned, as Diana said, this law has been a long time coming and many efforts. But can you speak more to that impunity, particularly from that perspective?
Sure. I think I would. I think it's interesting to examine this current moment in Israel's existence in terms that were briefly mentioned here, both by Muna and by Diana, which is the tension between continuity and break and the start of something new. Are we at the break and starting of something new, or is it just a cumulative process of continuation that brought us to? So I think it's both, and I mean it is very obvious. Nothing started on October 7th, of course. I mean, it had context, and it was part of it was part of what Israel created here for so many decades. But I think something has changed in the Israeli spirit, or in Israeli mindset, in a way, or maybe more accurately to say, something changed within the Israeli ethos on October 7th, after October 7th, which is, if up until now the Israeli ethos was Jewish and democratic, and I'm not saying, it doesn't mean, of course, that Israel was either democratic or Jewish for that matter, but when Israelis looked in the mirror, this is what they wanted to see up until October 7th. They wanted to see themselves as they wanted to see their state as this wonderful Jewish democracy. I think they no longer want to see that. The ethos changed when now Israelis look in the collective mirror. What they want to see is the brute of, the bully, the strongest, most fearless, crazy bully that does whatever the hell it wants and doesn't consider anything, that despises international law, that despises human rights, despises any hint of humanity, and acts according to the rules of the jungle. This is a very dramatic change. Basically, Israelis keep saying very explicitly to the rest of the world, we are no longer a democracy, and neither do we want to be one. It is really amazing that the world refuses to listen, because at this point, Israel is saying it with full mouth, like with all the words. They are saying it explicitly. We do not want to see. It's not that we are hiding it. It's not that we are tired of the mask. We are tired of these games of pretending. We do not want to be a democracy anymore. It is really astonishing that the world still refuses to listen.
Thank you, Orly, and thank you to all of you for providing such thoughtful answers to each of those questions. And I think now we can go to the Q&A from the audience. We have several questions. So I'm going to try and go couple some of them together because some of them are kind of similar. We do have a question regarding the UN, like various UN resolutions and UN peacekeepers, and how likely something like that could be used to, to stop a piece of legislation like this, to stop the death penalty law, along with things like the ICJ case that we saw recently regarding Israel's genocide in Gaza. I guess I can put that to, I mean, I'll give that if Muna or Diana want to answer that, or, um,
I can say it is a challenging question. I think that it's been like our suspicion or our lack of belief in the international system, as I'm speaking as a Palestinian, like has always been there, but it has intensified in the last 2.5 years. And yeah, definitely, it's not like we're going to say these mechanisms don't work, and so we should just not engage with them, but we should also face that it is challenging, like even before the genocide, through the work of Adalah, the 2014 onslaught on Gaza, there were a lot of attempts trying to hold Israel accountable for the crimes committed then. We're talking about over 2,000 people being killed in 51 days, and we thought that this is the most horrible crimes that can happen. And there were many attempts to push international mobilization and international accountability mechanisms to take action, and unfortunately that didn't happen, or that it stalled, and we had to witness. We're witnessing a genocide, and we're witnessing a lot of challenges by the I don't know, unwillingness or inability of the international mechanisms to act. But I still believe that they still have a lot of work to do. It doesn't say that they're exempt from doing anything, but they have a lot of work to do in order to stop this law and stop other policies and other practices that violate our everything.
Diana, do you want to answer? I can go to the next question.
Yeah, the only thing I can say is that that's not really the way that international law works. International law doesn't really doesn't go into the internal laws of a country. It's first left up to the country itself. And then based on that, you can then use international mechanisms. But there are many countries around the world that unfortunately still have the death penalty. One thing that can be done, which is, I think, maybe a little bit of a slightly different question, is that there are countries where, for example, let's take a look at Europe, where they have tried to block trade with other countries based on the fact that those other countries have the death penalty. That's something that, rather than just blah blah blah, and we're so deeply concerned or whatever it is, they can actually do something. There are mechanisms of boycott. There are mechanisms that states can do. They're not just, oh, helpless us. But I sometimes feel like these countries hide behind we are so helpless because America is so powerful, when there are things they can actually do.
Thank you, Deanna. We also have a question regarding whistleblowers, and specifically regarding the Israeli official who was a whistleblower regarding the horrific act against one of the imprisoned Palestinian prisoners of gang rape. I think folks are wondering a bit more about what Israel is doing to target folks who do that work. I know, Orly, you kind of covered that, but I'm wondering if you can speak more about that.
Yeah, so this also goes way, way back. I mean, Israel trying to shut anyone who tries to expose the crimes, especially if they come from within the system. I mean, I must say it's fascinating to see, and it's very telling, I think, the process of the way the Israeli policy vis-a-vis the human rights organizations changed throughout the years. Because once they were actually very proud of having such flourishing human rights scene in Israel, and they would actually, I remember, it was never us, thank God, in B'Tselem, but I know of other, not maybe human rights organizations, but peace organizations and some human rights organizations that were part of official delegations of the foreign ministry of Israel, just because Israel was bragging about the fact that, they are so free to operate. Now we are being very, very clearly being incited against and also persecuted in a way of trying to limit our ability to work in every way that they can so far. And they are thinking about, new ways to limit our ability to work. But one of the first organizations that was on the target of this wave of persecuting lefties and anything that smells of human rights was actually Breaking the Silence, which is in a way an organization of whistleblowers in a way that they come from, these are ex-soldiers coming from within the system, most of which actually devoted Zionist. It's not even an anti-Zionist organization in any way. They are just people that went to the army, usually committed Zionists, that thought that they were doing something very patriotic, and woke up one day and realized what horrible crimes they committed. And they wanted to share that with maybe a naive belief that if the Israelis would know what horrible crimes are being committed in the occupied territories, maybe something will change. They were, the system treated them, I think, worse than any of us, because they really, really resented the fact that people from within the system sort of, speaking against it. And I will just conclude by saying I think they were successful, and it is very sad to say, but the fact that after more than 2 years of unimaginable genocide, we keep using that word, it maybe we are losing sensitivity, but it's over 2 years of systematically annihilating people and a whole civilization that was annihilated, with so many people taking part in that horrible crime. How many whistleblowers did we have? How many people went to Breaking the Silence and gave testimonies? Very, very few. So I think that it's both that the policy has been successful, but also it says something about where the Israeli mindset is today, as I referred to earlier.
Thank you. And, I think related to what you're speaking about, targeting human rights organizations, documenting this work, we do have a question asking about the impact of the fact that one of the most prominent organizations defending the rights of children who were imprisoned by Palestine, by Israel, Palestinian children imprisoned by Israel, Defense for Children International Palestine, has been forced to close and transfer its work to other organizations based on the extreme Israeli oppression that's taking place in the West Bank. I'm wondering if, Deanna, you can speak about that, and also if we can have, I think there's also questions about clarity of would this apply to children? And it would be good to get some clarity about that as well.
So I wish Defense for Children International Palestine section was closing down for the reasons that there weren't going to be children being thrown in prison any longer. But that's not the reality, that Palestinians live The reason that it's closing down is because back in 2021, this was one of several organizations that was targeted by the Israeli government. And after it was targeted by the Israeli government, it became very difficult for it to be able to obtain and to sustain its funding. And so as a result of not being able to obtain and sustain its funding, unfortunately, the organization has had to close down. And of course, this isn't the only organization. There are several organizations that are right now under the radar. Several of them have been on the sanctions list. And so it's just a question of time before these organizations, I'm afraid, I hope I'm wrong, but I'm afraid that it's just a question of time before these ones are targeted too. Now, the issue isn't just that they're not getting funding, it's that they can't even get their money in because of the nature of the banking system in which all Palestinian banks have to have a corresponding Israeli bank as well. So we see that there's just this system that is there, slowly crushing Palestinians and crushing those individuals who are trying to defend Palestinians. And the fact that that we're now seeing this coming after Palestinian children is really terrifying.
Thank you, Diana. We have a question for you, Muna, and I think you've already touched on this, but maybe if you can just speak a bit more about it, that how you mentioned how this law does not apply retroactively. It's already, a question of already of those who've been charged. And would the changes in the civil penal code, for instance, apply to Palestinians from Gaza arbitrarily detained who are held without charge? I know Diana spoke a bit about this, but if Muna, you could speak a bit more to clarify how this law would, who this law would apply to.
Yeah,
And sorry, just to also clarify, I think there's also questions for folks, the aspect of the noose, like how that is an aspect of this piece of legislation, which is absolutely horrifying. Sorry to add.
The aspect of what, sorry?
The actual noose that we're seeing and being used.
Okay, so just to go back to the question of retroactivity, because a lot of panic, like after the law passed, we saw a lot of panic for current prisoners in Israeli jails. So the law amends the military orders and the Israeli penal code, but the basic, so what these laws says that an offense, like no one can be tried, no one can be detained for an act committed when the offense, when the offense hasn't been enacted yet. So what the death penalty law introduces a new offense. So like it can't apply retroactively. It can't, if someone who is being accused of intentionally killing under terror circumstances in February, it can't apply to them, and it can't apply to, of course, to a previous period. So this law doesn't. So this law is looking to the future. The effect that it has now, it's because it's also specifically targeting Palestinian, is like spreading this terror that people can be tried, people can be hanged, and that's what they also paraded. And even and I think part of the confusion was when you hear people like Ben Gvir, or specifically Ben Gvir, because he would go into the detention centers wearing the pin with the noose, and then saying that we're going to hang each one. I think it created this confusion, but also it's not like completely unbased, because now we need to also keep in mind and to keep focused on other legislative initiative that is going to be prepared for a second and third hearing in the Knesset, which is establishing a special tribunal for those that Israel is accusing of being part of the 7th of October attacks. So they're going to, what they want is to establish a new military tribunal, and they're not introducing new offenses because they know that they can do that retroactively. But and we know that, as Diana mentioned before, that Israeli law did have the death penalty, so they want to try and implement it. The death penalty that they didn't use since 1962, they want to implement it now. Israel has a genocide law. They're adopted into internal law the genocide conventions, and they're also trying to implement it as well, trying to describe what happened the day of October 7th as a genocide against the Jewish people. So while this law doesn't apply retroactively, they are working in different ways in order to enact death penalty against those who are still there for 2.5 years. They are still not charged or not tried. They are held in detention without under any legal framework. So they will try to implement that on them. I hope that answers.
Yes, thank you, Muna. Orly, we have a question regarding Israel moving in lockstep with the U.S. in many of its actions, as you know, we're seeing in Iran, and as you know, the U.S. continues to provide support to Israel through military, political funding, and impunity. Can you speak a bit more about that in the broader context?
Yeah, I mean, it is, I think that the Israeli mindset that I mentioned before, of, a new world with no laws, or at least no laws that apply to Israel, really sits well with the personality of the current American president, which basically holds the same worldview, according to which nothing really limits their wishes and abilities. A total despise to international law, and the utter admiration to brutality and power as virtues, as values. So I think this it coincides with the Israel sinking deeper and deeper into fascism, and now we have an American president that basically is a total loose cannon and was very. I don't know if you read the New York Times piece about how he was basically manipulated into a war which he was warned against by everyone except for Haxet, who is a different story by itself. But he was basically, even the very conservative Trump administration, every single one of them warned him against this war. But the thing is that it shouldn't be so, and of course we had a complete criminal war with no basis against civilians, Iranian civilians, this time. But this is just another. This really shouldn't be singled out, because it's not just America, and it's not just the America under Trump. America under all presidents and all of the international arena, or most of it at least, has not only allowed Israel for such a long time to behave like, this special project that has different rules applied to it and full impunity. Throughout the genocide in Gaza, Israel was committing armed dealings and now is enjoying the fruit of this genocide because now it is selling not to the US, to the entire world, the field tested weapon, tested on who? On the Palestinians in Gaza. So it's not, I think it's a very limited way to see it. It is especially dangerous, the fact that we have this Israeli prime minister and this Israeli government with this specific American president. But but what got us to this point is a long history of impunity and of allowing Israel to do whatever it wants and to cooperate with it fully, funding its never-ending wars and funding this genocide as well. And if you allow me one more sentence in this regard, I think that this impunity, Israel uses the anti-Semitic tool to shut every criticism against the Israeli policies as being anti-Semitic, and it's really important for me as a Jewish Israeli to say the following: the essence of anti-Semitism is excluding Jews as a collective from human laws, saying that the human laws and norms do not apply to Jews as a collective. This is exactly what Israel is doing. It demands to be excluded as a Jewish collective from human and international norms and laws. And I cannot think of a more anti-Semitic thing than that.
Thank you so much, Orly. Deanna had to hop off, but I do want to, we have several questions about, what folks can do, whether you're in the United States, if you're somewhere around the world in terms of international advocacy, speaking out more, and then give each of you an opportunity to share some closing remarks. I also really just want to put a plug in that there is a link in the chat for folks who want to support IMU Policy Project, continue to see more webinars like this, and ability for us to continue to do this work. We're very, very grateful for you spending this time with us, and appreciate any kind of support. So if Muna, if you want to touch on, I think you already touched on this, but various ways that, folks can advocate and support the work that Adalah is doing, continue to reach out to various international organizations and within the respective countries, or, many of us here in the United States, to demand that our elected officials and folks do more to pressure Israel and to be held account to international law.
Yeah, thank you. I think you summarized it exactly that. I think that what we have been hearing is that, for example, states saying or expressing their deep concern from the law or from different Israeli policies. And I think that we're at that stage where we need more than that. We need just, it doesn't stop. And it's not enough to say that we're deeply concerned with and we're troubled by. Action needs to be taken. And I think that people have the power to pressure their governments and in order to take action. And we've already covered it pretty well, like the steps that can be taken in order to have effective measures to stop Israel from implementing the law. Like we do have this this petition. I can say that we are hopeful because the law is very problematic It's not like the law is very problematic even in Israeli legal measures, and we do have the hope that the court will intervene. But if it's gonna take time, or we've seen that for now, no interim act or measure has been taken, so pressure from implementing the law or from thinking about having these what Ben-Gvir has been showing the rooms with the ropes and with the like even the torture that he's been taking pride of against Palestinian political prisoners and detainees. So pressure needs to be put on taking actions against them and stopping them. So a lot of pressure needs. We've seen acts also putting the spotlight on the conditions of Palestinian prisoners, which is also a top priority. So I think efforts need to be made for actual actions instead of just concerns.
Thank you, Muna. And I want to give each of you an opportunity to share closing remarks. I will say just to try and so we can address all the questions we received. We did receive a question about, and I think this can be incorporated in either of your closing remarks, about the shift in public opinion on these issues. So while we are seeing an increase of Israel's brutal violence and impunity from the United States and the international community in so many ways, we are seeing an increase of public opinion, supporting Palestinians and calling out against what Israel is doing. So if that is something you're able to touch on in your opening remarks, we welcome you, and I'll have Orly, you go ahead and start with the closing remarks, excuse me, closing remarks.
Thank you, Janine. There are so many things to touch on. I will just maybe first add two more things. I mean, the question really, I mean, if we have international audience watching us, really the question of what can they do is the most crucial question, because everyone has an obligation and a role right now. It will not stop. Israel will not stop until it will be stopped. It will not stop on its own will, and it will get it will deteriorate more and more until somebody puts a stop to it. So in addition to what Mona said and what the things that you mentioned, Janine, I would add also share information, seek information and share information. The more people are informed, information is a very good motivating tool. People tend to be more proactive when they have more information. So look for the information in the various sources that avail them and share them. And the other thing, wherever you are, whichever state, country you're living, look at the ways that your country is involved in the Israeli apartheid regime, and then create local campaigns. These are very effective. There is a very good source, Who Profits from the Occupation. You can look out according to your country and see the ways that your country is involved in the occupation and the apartheid, and start and promote local campaigns. Why is it so important to stop it really now? Because we are still not at we are at the bottom. We are very, very low, but there is still room for deterioration, and serious one. The Palestinian friends are really very concretely worried about second Nakba, and Israeli politicians are threatening explicitly with second Nakba. Regarding this specific law, which is right now directed almost exclusively at Palestinians, when Bezalel Smotrich was asked, what about the traitors from within? speaking about Jewish lefties, I mean, everybody understands that in the Israeli context and discourse. He said, well, of course, it will apply to them as well. So we are before it's a very crucial moment in time that needs really the full awakening of the international community. And we've seen such an amazing solidarity movement with Palestinians throughout the horrifying genocide in Gaza. I think that if they can mobilize it to put more pressure to stop Israel right now, it's not a moment too soon.
Thank you so much, Orly. And Muna, I would like to pass it to you for any closing remarks.
Not much more to add, I think. But yeah, I think knowledge is power, and it's very important. Like this law, people paid attention to it, but it's also important to follow and to keep track of everything else that has been happening. And yes, taking action, putting pressure, and demanding accountability. That's ending this impunity, because things have been going from bad to worse. And whenever we think that we've reached rock bottom, we're amazed to know that we can get to a much worse situation. So yeah, act.
Thank you both so much for joining us this evening. I know it is late for you, so we're very grateful for your time. And thank you to everybody who attended. We hope, that you continue to follow the work, and invite you to continue to follow the work of IMEU Policy Project. This is something that IMEU Policy Project and IMEU will consistently be working on and sharing information. You can follow IMEU's social media at IMEU Policy. And we wish everybody a good evening for those who it is evening, and a good afternoon for those who it's a good afternoon. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.